It is impossible, of course, for any of us to judge how we would respond to a given situation or circumstance until or unless we are actually in it. Maybe any of us, if blessed with greater wealth than perhaps any other individual in all of human history, would also choose to spend our time interacting frantically with foil-hatted weirdos, manically amplifying absurd conspiracy theories, and attempting to foment civil war in the United Kingdom. Once you have a hangar full of private jets, your own space program, and a pet US president, perhaps life starts to feel a little empty. Who knows? In London, a couple of weeks back, a crowd of 100,000 or so people, united by fondness for daytime drinking and dislike of foreigners, were addressed via video link by Elon Musk, proprietor of X, the social media platform formerly known, and formerly not entirely a toxic swamp, as Twitter. Among Musk's remarks was one calling for the removal of the UK's current government and another to the effect that his audience needed to, quote, fight back or die. For attendees, the irony that they were being incited by an African immigrant to the United States was as lost as their custody cases. For at least one prominent British politician, a line was crossed. Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, the third largest party in the UK's House of Commons, called for Musk to be prosecuted. Wittingly or otherwise, Sir Ed demonstrated the grip social media has on modern politics by posting this suggestion on X. Wealthy media barons have always used their outlets to further their own agendas and even shape events. Journalistic legend insists that as far back as the 1890s, the American newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst cabled a photographer who had complained that his assignment to an allegedly febrile Havana was proving quiet. "You furnish the pictures," Hearst told him. "I'll furnish the war." But social media has a reach, an immediacy and an impunity that even Hearst could not have dreamt of. X, which is not even the biggest platform, has more users than most countries have citizens and is directed by someone with more money than some countries. Has social media become a threat to national security? If so, what can be done about it? And should governments set an example by deleting their accounts? This is the Foreign Desk.
No one expected it to be the political weapon that it's become.
Elon Musk is the main character on X. What used to be a little bit of indirect manipulation is a lot more overt here.
I think it's harder and harder, even though we give the tools and methods for young people and older people to recognize disinformation.
You're listening to the Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. Our first guest is a member of Sir Ed Davey's party, the Liberal Democrats, and a member of UK Parliament. Christine Jardine, MP for Edinburgh West. She joins us from Edinburgh. Christine, let's start with the very recent suggestion of the leader of your party, Sir Ed Davey, that Elon Musk, proprietor of X, should be prosecuted by British authorities. On what grounds?
I think Ed, like a lot of people, was unhappy that Elon Musk had used his platform to not just badmouth the UK, but incite violence in a way. Say to people, get out there and fight. That's not what we need. And it's unhealthy, I think, for anyone to be using not just social media, but any sort of media platform to do that. What Elon Musk was doing, what his motivation was, I really don't know, but I think that was the fear, that this was a big, powerful man with lots of influence, trying deliberately to undermine Britain.
I mean, it is obviously a fairly dramatic suggestion to make, and there are other dramatic, I guess, actions that could be taken by governments, not just the United Kingdom's, although Elon Musk does seem weirdly obsessed with the idea of a civil war here. Do you think we're getting anywhere close to the case for a platform such as X just being entirely shut down?
I think it would be very difficult to do it lawfully. You have all the concerns about freedom of speech. I think what we need, rather than shutting organisations down, is to have better regulation. and to have more awareness that they should perhaps be regarded as publishers rather than platforms, and that they should face the same sort of regulation as other publishers. Because at the moment they don't, as you know. And the problem with that is that you can say just about anything you like almost on online media, and it's somehow deemed acceptable to say it. And there are other areas where social media is a big problem. And we have a lot of problems with misogyny, with young men's attitude to young women, how young women are feeling in the world today. And a lot of it stems back to how social media platforms are being used, what's being promoted on the internet. The people, I know as a politician, the abuse that you get on the internet. If people said to you in the street or behaved towards you in a pub the way they do on the internet, they probably would get arrested. So I think we just didn't realise that social media, that it would get to the state now where you have giant world players using it to say what they want to say without question.
If it didn't exist last week and the platform was launched this week with the general tone and content or lack of moderation that it currently possesses, do you think you and other Liberal Democrats would open accounts on it?
That's a very good question. I doubt it, actually. I think it was because originally it was, and the clue to what we all anticipated is in the title, social media. We thought it was going to be sociable. No one expected it to be the political weapon that it's become. I think the reason so many politicians stay on it at the moment is because of the media presence on it. It is still a way of the media seeing what people are saying, what announcements are being made. I think that is the key. I also now have a Blue Sky account, which I use. You know, I live in hope that something is done to kind of temper some of the less. It's not that it's acceptable is pejorative in the terms of it, you know, people can say, well, just because you don't like it doesn't mean that people should be able to say it. But there are things on the internet which we know are damaging young people's mental health. There are things on the internet which we know are people using social media to get lies out there, which influence public thought.
Which does prompt the inevitable question of what's stopping you, Sir Ed Davey and the rest of the Liberal Democrats from just deactivating all your X accounts en masse. That would be a fairly swift and decisive statement, wouldn't it?
Well, that is a question I ask myself every day, but that doesn't actually stop any social media platform putting out the other stuff that is awful.
But it stops driving traffic to that platform. It stops making that. It does that small bit to making that platform less influential and less economically viable.
Well, that is, I mean, there is an argument for doing it. And as I say, I've thought every day, why don't I do it? But at the moment, I think it has to reach a sort of critical mass of people saying, no, we're not doing it anymore. It is there. It is a way a lot of my constituents, for example, look at my Twitter account to see what I've been doing. So I have to decide, do I not let them know what I'm doing anymore? Do I, is there a better way I can communicate with them? And I'll be honest, what I'm doing is I'm building up my presence and following on other social media so that I can say I don't need Twitter anymore. But it would be in the days when, say, the Times and the Telegraph and the Daily Mail, and for that matter, the Daily Mirror, were what held sway, to say I'm not going to speak to any of them because I don't like their owners, wouldn't have been helpful to any politician, because you have to communicate with people. And if the public are reading those newspapers, or the public are using that platform, then you've got a responsibility to communicate with them. And as I say, my own tactic is to build up presence elsewhere so that Twitter is less important.
But do you wonder, though, because there is an effect whereby, as you said, all the politicians are on it because all the media's on it, and the media would probably argue that we're all on it because all the politicians are on it, that we have started perhaps to, if I could jump from the boiling frog to the emperor's new clothes, invest it with a power that it does not perhaps suggest. To explain to our listeners, you are the MP for Edinburgh West. You're talking to us from Scotland. The Scottish government, which is led by the SNP, has in recent days just floated the idea that Scottish government accounts could start to disconnect from Twitter, now X, and just not use it anymore. Do you think, though, that would be doing the taxpayers and voters of Scotland any great disservice?
I think for them alone to do it would not be effective. I think if Westminster, if the UK government said, you know what, enough, and they worked together, actually the prospect of them working together in anything is probably optimistic, but if we could get them to agree to this, and the Welsh Senate as well, if they all said, no, we're not doing it, and every local authority in the country said, no, we're not using it, then yes, it would have an impact. But I think that's part of the problem. If we're going to stop using Twitter, or X, as I really should call it now, then it has to be everyone together. And if we all stopped all at once, that might make a difference.
Is part of the problem also that we don't actually know how many accounts on X are real people and not bots being operated from warehouses in Russia, China, or wherever else?
That, for me, is one of the biggest worries about social media and its involvement in politics. It's not so much Elon Musk. Elon Musk, we can see, we know what he's saying, we know it's him. But there was the suggestion when we had that massive outage of the internet, a whole lot of pro-independence accounts and tweeting in Scotland stopped. And the suggestion was that they were all bots, that they were foreign bots. And that's the problem, that we get foreign actors who have false accounts just flooding social media with fake news. And I don't know how we control that, and I don't know how we stop that. And I don't think me leaving Twitter would make an ounce of difference to that. In a way, it's a reason for staying there and fighting it.
Christine Jardine, MP for Edinburgh West, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller. In social media, as in many other realms, what begins as a niche cult concern becomes the mainstream. The tone of the current discourse on many platforms, X in particular, was arguably established in murky and nihilistic corners of the internet, which, while frequently unsavoury, were at least able to assume that most visitors appreciated and understood a subtext of leaden irony. It is unclear that the same can be said for modern social media users and indeed modern social media proprietors. I'm joined now by James Ball, political editor at the New World magazine and author most recently of The Other Pandemic, How QAnon Conquered the World. James, let's start with where we are now. If we look at social media in general, X in particular, does anything about the current state of it surprise you?
I think we're seeing a new thing with X in that this is what happens if a social media network is captured by an extremist. I think we've been battling with what happens when algorithms optimize for attention over quality, what happens when people radicalize themselves, what happens when you don't know what goes into an algorithm, particularly with TikTok. There's a real black box effect. We've been battling those for years. What you now have with X is the social network that journalists were most addicted to, the one that we are used to letting shape our political narratives, let us shape our coverage, has been seized by someone who is essentially its biggest power user. He's got 200 million plus followers of his own, and he's got now a very, very radical and a very extreme political program that he isn't afraid to point the network at. I think that is a new phenomenon. I think that's quite different from what we've seen before. Although I don't know if it actually materially changes the shape of the policy challenges or the general challenges of social media that profoundly.
Is it different from the way that media barons of the pre-digital age have, obviously used their news networks and their news agencies to push their own carts?
I think there's a difference in terms of scale. I don't think anything has quite, X is one of the least significant social networks in terms of users, and yet it's got about 300 million active users. I think that is quite different from even the viewership of something like Fox News, which is in the low millions every day. You also have the sense that Elon Musk is the main character on X. He is its main influencer. He is the person who sort of personally spreads the message, etc. It's as if Rupert Murdoch was the primetime Fox News host. What used to be a little bit of indirect manipulation is a lot more overt here. I guess as well, the fact that we actively participate in social gives it a bit of a different feeling. So I think we're dealing with something new, but not, as you sort of hint, it's not unprecedented. All media has owners, and owners always shape the networks they own, or the outlets they own, or what would be the point of owning them.
But to draw on your own research into online subcultures, does it strike you that there's kind of an inevitability to what social media is becoming, and again, what X in particular has become? Because it strikes me, at least, that the line from the swamps of 4chan, QAnon, Pizzagate, etc. to X now is fairly straight and fairly short.
I think we self-opt into social media. We use the networks that we enjoy and we leave the ones that we don't. And I think there has been a visible change in the user base on X since Elon took over. I think some liberals have very pointedly and loudly left and gone off to Blue Sky or other networks. I mean, that's what I've done. I think a lot more people have just very quietly quit or spent less time on it, as it has shifted quite visibly to appeal to the 4chan user base, to that type of person. I think a lot more people use YouTube than use conventional social networks. A lot more people use Instagram. Those are a lot less capital P political, unless you choose to make them so. A lot more people use TikTok, where we don't quite know what shapes the algorithm, but a lot of people have a lot of theories. So there's an inevitability to Elon's decision to shape X in the way that he did. I don't think it necessarily has as much impact as it looks to. I think it has changed as radically as it has because it has deliberately scared away one type of user and deliberately attracted another.
But do you think we are arriving perhaps at a point in the social media experiment where we have to kind of admit that unless steps are taken, unless it's very tightly regulated, tightly moderated, it does have an inbuilt tendency to default towards the toxic?
I think any unregulated space probably will lean towards the toxic. If people test the boundaries online, and if there are no boundaries, you'd lead them to it. The UK has something of a quote-unquote free speech crisis at the moment. There are about 1,000 people a month arrested over social media posts. What usually doesn't follow but is true here is that almost all of those result in no further action. And of the ones that do have further action, it tends to just be cautions. Now, the other missing bit of the narrative here is that a lot of this happens because moderation doesn't happen anymore. Meta moderates a lot less since Trump got back into power, and X barely moderates at all. Very obvious hate speech or speech that's very clearly against its own terms is left untouched. And so because you can't just get a post deleted, because you can't just deal with things in the quick and easy ways that you used to online, people involve the police. It might be in a small minority of cases, but they're being left to do it. And so we're seeing challenges because the state is being asked to do what social networks should do. That's partly because we won't enforce existing laws. We aren't requiring networks to moderate, etc. But anything left ungoverned will tend towards the unpleasant, will tend towards chaos. And when you have an owner who actively wants to do that, who is actively trying to destabilize the UK, I think the government is being very slow and very naive in its response on that. I don't think there's any inevitability to it. I think this is very manageable. I think until about 9 months ago, you're actually starting to see governments find that they could regulate the internet after all. Elon took on Brazil and lost fairly spectacularly. You were starting to see, Telegram proved that it wasn't a Wild West. The CEO got arrested and given a bit of a shakedown in France, and Telegram has fallen into line and been much less of a problem. It isn't actually that mysterious or that hard to regulate the internet or regulate major social media. It's just a lot more difficult when suddenly it's going to cause you huge problems with the US government to do so.
I mean, that aside, the political problems it would cause with the US government acknowledged, if that wasn't an issue, when you talk about it not being that complicated or difficult to regulate social media, as a practical example, what would that actually mean? What would be an actual step forward on that front?
So the infrastructure's in place. We have regulations for online companies. We have standards of behavior and standards of moderation. None of that's draconian. The US has these, even Section 230, which is famously what stops social media companies being sued for what their users say, has conditions for that to apply. And so all we have to do is enforce some of the existing laws. You can levy fines against a social media company, and that's not that difficult to do because they make revenue from users in this country. You can then sort of threaten to block it. You can take action against UK-based staff. You can take action against UK companies. Twitter/X still has hundreds of millions of revenue go through its UK entity. The UK government could look at that, enforce it, levy fines. There's a lot you can do before you're trying to ask Donald Trump to extradite Elon Musk in chains. There's just a big unwillingness to do this. France sort of demonstrated what can be done when you have the chief exec travel through your territory. India and Brazil have both essentially used local staff as something quite close to hostages before. A lot of companies now require social networks to have offices with local staff and local executives in the country. And that essentially gives them someone they can arrest, someone they can hang consequences over, which I don't love as a liberal. But if social networks end up showing that that's the only way to make them behave, then government should sit up and take some notice. There is no imaginary online-only world. These things have infrastructure in countries. They have payment systems in countries. They have users in countries. They can quite straightforwardly be regulated.
Just to bring it back finally then to the theme of the program, the idea that they may actually pose social media companies a national security threat. How malevolent are the consequences, or how dangerous are the consequences of not taking action at this point? And to focus it particularly, how dangerous is it if you have somebody appearing via video link at a rally in your country attempting to incite civil war, and you just sort of shrug and go, oh, well, and keep posting on his platform?
I think we have to separate the threat of Elon Musk as Elon Musk from the threat of X as a social network. And I think the more the government can act to fix all social networks and respond to them in the same way, the better and the more robust it will be in the long term. Elon is Elon. Social media is social media. I think you should look to enforce standards, enforce rules on deliberate influence operations on them, have consistent rules that protect speech, but also note that protecting speech means letting an authentic conversation happen that isn't hijacked by Russian bots or Chinese influence operations or all of this. There is a positive freedom here as well. Over-regulating social media and overreacting and censoring actual views of your own citizens is, I think, even more dangerous than the status quo. But I think there is a very happy medium to be found that isn't just sitting powerlessly and letting these networks be hijacked. It is more complicated when the owner is one of the bad actors, but I don't think it's beyond the wit of law or of politics to do this. And I think there are a lot of steps short of being draconian that we could be taking that just aren't being explored. It really feels like the old meme of we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas, which I think is an old Simpsons joke.
As fellow peak period Simpsons nerd can confirm. That was James Ball, political editor of the New World magazine and author of The Other Pandemic, How QAnon Conquered the World. This is the Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. While regulating or even prosecuting social media platforms may appeal to both despondent politicians and exasperated citizens, either course looks a stretch easier advocated than accomplished. Is there anything that can actually be done short of such drastic measures? Well, joining me finally is Niina Pentinen, Councillor for Education at the Finnish National Agency for Education. Niina, first of all, is it possible to explain concisely what Finland does differently when it comes to teaching media literacy? What is Finland doing that everybody else isn't?
I think it's the whole education system where we have the national curriculum, which is done at the National Agency for Education where I work. And then we have the local curriculums where education providers and schools can add things on the curriculum. And our curriculums are not this sort of like list of content and that these are the things that you have to teach in lessons. So we give objectives and then teachers can decide what sort of pedagogical methods they use at the local level. So media literacy, it's not a subject in our primary, lower or upper secondary education. We call it transversal competence. So it means that we have these 7 different competencies in our basic education, which should be taught inside every subject and also in the school culture. In our curriculum, it's called multiliteracy, and it means that the students evaluate, analyze information and media, and they also are producers. So they are like users and producers. And part of this multiliteracy is media education.
So it's an idea that's woven into the teaching of every subject?
Yes. So in history, it would mean that students are analyzing different sources from history and putting them in the context. In music, how the music is used as a tool for communication. This sort of like different things which are in the context of the subject.
I mean, I know this isn't the only area in which a lot of the rest of the world looks at Finland somewhat enviously and wonders, well, why can't we have this or why can't we do this? And it's a bit of a chicken and egg question, but lessons like this or teaching like this, is that only possible in what is, at least as I've always understood Finland, a pretty high trust society to begin with?
Yeah, I think that because we have studies that show that when people trust institutions, they also trust media and media content. And in Finland, we have really high trust in societal institutions. Even young people trust traditional media a lot, but actually they are not consuming it. They get most of their news from social media or from digital platforms. So I think that we are also facing the same problem than in other countries, that young people or all the people get their information about society from different sources, and it differs what the information is. So we are trying to emphasize that students would get their information from journalistic media. And in many schools, they are providing free access to the content of our biggest national newspaper. So schools are also trying to give like this actual ways to have the news from the sort of journalistic magazines or newspapers. But we see that it's a growing difficulty that these digital platforms are producing all the news, and we all know that it's many times not correct.
How difficult are you finding that, though? Because what I guess everybody in Finland and elsewhere runs up against is that sitting down with a newspaper or a magazine and absorbing a long, detailed, nuanced article requires time and it requires effort, and being able to put that time and effort in is sort of a force of habit anyway, and obviously your competition is really short, punchy, glib, entertaining, simple, digestible stuff. How are teachers able to now make the case to kids who've just got that on tap?
Well, I have to point out that Our class teachers have a master's degree, so we are putting a lot of trust on the teachers because they have the high quality education. So we are putting a lot of trust to teachers. And our whole system is that we have our agency, or we have the Ministry of Culture and Education, and we have a National Audiovisual Institute, which are all trying to strengthen media literacy. And we have also a lot of NGOs which are doing it. So it's this sort of like a cooperation between governmental offices and ministries and NGOs. So it seems that it's a curriculum, the teachers, the whole society, trust in the society, democratic processes, and so on.
Is it your sense, though, and it is a question brought into even greater focus by the advent of AI, that Finland's government, for obvious reasons, and Finland in general for obvious reasons, is maybe a bit more sensitive about the national security threats posed by social media than most countries?
Yes, and I think that Finland is not the most fertile ground for this sort of disinformation concerning, let's say, comprehensive security issues, because we have our history with Russia or with Soviet Union. So it's a different situation here that let's compare to Southern European countries, which don't have the same history living next to a superpower. So we haven't seen any of these very effective disinformation campaigns concerning or from Russia. Those haven't been very effective in Finland. But of course, we have the same sort of conspiracy theories and, anti-vaccines and this sort of disinformation which is spreading in social media. But these comprehensive security issues, we have this sort of collective memory of being in the same sort of situation. Or I think we can understand what Ukraine is going through now.
And just finally, this is where I want to test a pet theory. Is it arguable that the problem is maybe not so much with the kids who've grown up in this media environment, but with their parents and grandparents who didn't grow up in this media environment and still have a reflexive tendency to believe everything they see on a screen or in print?
We have some studies about the issue. We know that young people think that they have a lot of capacity or competence to recognize this sort of misinformation or disinformation. But if they can actually do it, that's a different thing. I think also adults, people think that they might have better skills that they actually have, because we know that the content that we now see on the internet, the Finnish language is quite perfect. Beforehand, you could realize that something was disinformation because the Finnish language was so badly written. But now with the AI, they have fixed that problem. So I think it's harder and harder, even though that we give the tools and methods for young people and older people to recognize disinformation. But then we are trying to give different tools, like don't react with emotion and think twice. And we are trying to strengthen the knowledge base of the students. So if they see something, let's say, which is disinformation in history, they should actually have the real context from the learning of history that they can compare the disinformation to. So giving this sort of tools.
Niina Pentinen, Councillor for Education at the Finnish National Agency for Education, thank you for joining us. That's it for this episode of The Foreign Desk. We'll be back next week, and look out for The Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Anita Riota and Lily Austin. Lily also produces The Foreign Desk Explainer. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email Anita at aer@monocle.com, and don't forget to subscribe to Monocle magazine and to our free daily email bulletins by heading to our website at monocle.com. From me, Andrew Muller, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.